Hello, and thank you for joining me today on Geezers of Gear, episode number 222. And of course, today is a very special day, my favorite day for reading promos. It's Elation Day. And so today's podcast is brought to you by Elation. Elation is excited to offer the new Proteus Hybrid Max, the highly anticipated successor to the company's pioneering Proteus Hybrid, the moving head that arguably started the revolution of IP-rated lighting. Faster, brighter, and with a tougher IP66 rating, the Proteus Hybrid Max has already been featured on some premier events like the New Year's Eve light show on Seattle's Space Needle and Enchanted Forest of Lights at Descanso Gardens in Southern California. And I'm sure I said that wrong. Descanso Gardens in Southern California. Eric, I expect to hear from you very quickly on this one. Please check out the Proteus Hybrid Max and all Elation fixtures at elationlighting.com. And today's podcast is also brought to you by Mainlight. Mainlight is the partner you trust with the gear you want. It's a dry hire rental company and excels in offering superior lighting and stage equipment without competing with its customers, offering everything from high-intensity lights for large events to precision fixtures for theater and TV film. Mainlight also offers for sale used equipment with a 60-day depot warranty. All equipment is meticulously maintained, tested, and Mainlight owned with no brokerage. With 4 key locations, Mainlight's Tri-State in Teterboro, New Jersey, Mainlight East in Wilmington, Delaware, South in Nashville, Tennessee, and West in Las Vegas, Nevada, they combine the resources of a national company with the personal touch of a local provider. Mainlight consistently updates its inventory with the latest in lighting technology, truss solutions, and control consoles, including a wide selection of weather-resistant IP65 rated fixtures for outdoor venues. Visit mainlight.com to explore their offerings and connect with representatives across all Mainlight locations, ensuring your event's lighting needs are met with expertise and efficiency. Welcome back to episode number 222. And yes, so of course I botched the promos as I always do. And at the end of the day, I am probably not a radio advertising guy, but I love our sponsors nonetheless. So again, thanks to today's sponsors, Elation and Mainlight, who we appreciate very much. And I think we've mentioned recently that we have a couple of new sponsors coming on. We actually have 4 new sponsors. We've filled some spots in our sponsorship openings. And the last 2 were amazing because they came to us. We didn't reach out to them at all. And we're getting out there, I guess. So thank you to all of our sponsors. And again, especially to Mainlight and Elation, today's sponsors. Today's guest is really somebody that I've been wanting to have on the podcast for a long time. Don't know why it took us this long to do, but today's guest is Jim Digby, and everyone knows the name. Jim has had nearly four decade journey in production and project management roles within live events and music touring, and he has been working alongside artists including Linkin Park, Hootie and the Blowfish, Backstreet Boys, Bolshoi Ballet, Phil Collins, and most recently helping to lead the delivery of entertainment mega projects, including Saudi Arabia, first ever international music festival in the kingdom in 2018. That's pretty exciting. Now they're doing all kinds of festivals there, and so he did the first one. Jim was on the stage in 1992 when James Hetfield was seriously injured by a flame special effect, and 55,000 people rioted. He was a stage manager at Woodstock 99 when 200,000 people rioted. He was with Marilyn Manson in the aftermath of the Columbine shooting when riots ensued, and has stared down myriad tenuous circumstances. Jim then became the co-founder and president of the Event Safety Alliance, a board member in the behind the scenes charity, keynote speaker, presenter in matters related to event safety and events production, career path, and mental wellness in live events. Jim tirelessly and passionately advocates for the health and sustainability of our industry at large. Jim is an amazing leader and really is leading the charge towards safety with live events. And we appreciate him coming on.
Yeah.
Hello, Jim. How are you?
Hi, Marcel. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Fan-flippin-tastic. We were just having an off-air conversation about the incredible Stanley Cup, which Jim has done massive research on and tore out of the bleeding hands of his young daughter because there's lead poisoning in Stanley Cups. We're announcing it live here, backed up by
Oh God,
scientific
don't put me in
information.
that space. I am not saying that. My God, I'm going to get sued.
Yeah.
No, there
It's
are
my
some
podcast. I'll
reports
get
that the
sued.
plug. Well, good. I'm neither confirming nor denying that information.
Yeah. Yeah, you said there was reports of a plug that could possibly, maybe, might let lead into the water.
Maybe might, yeah, or into the fingers if the plug comes out or something like that. I mean,
Oh,
it's on the
interesting.
internet, and you have to believe everything you read on the internet, don't you?
It just blows me away how crazy popular that thing has. I mean, it's a water cup that people are fighting over, and it's insane how something so simple can go so viral.
It is a mark of today's society, isn't it? I mean, the explosive consumerism that we live in. If it worked like that for all the artists we have an opportunity to work with, it'd be
Yeah.
fantastic, right? We'd have
Yeah,
plenty of
yeah,
work.
yeah. Well, maybe they just
Yeah.
need to put their picture on a Yeti or on a Stanley Cup, like Taylor Swift. Look, she got famous because of it. So yeah, I mean,
I'm
it's.
drinking out of my Yeti. I've got Yeti coffee and I've got Yeti water.
I
So
have a Yeti
we're good.
coffee cup, but it doesn't fit. I have a BMW, and it doesn't fit in the cup holder in my BMW because I don't know why, but so I don't use it
I'm
very
doing the
often.
one's
But
hot, one's cold comparison right now with these two things.
that's beautiful.
They
We're
can
not
they
we're
can
not
sit next to
cons-
each other and
we're
not.
not into consumerism at all with three Yeti cups between the two of us right now. So yeah, well, I appreciate you taking time this morning. You're in Philadelphia, I think.
I am in the bucolic countryside of Pennsylvania, about an hour west of Philly, and just shy of the amazing Rocklidditz campus, where, as you know, Tate and Claire and
Yeah, of
all
course.
those wonderful companies reside.
That's cool. So you have an office near Rocklidditz, in Rocklidditz?
I have an office in my basement because
Oh,
that's where
okay.
I've been relegated to in
Yeah.
the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
I
go
get
out of
it.
our driveway and go west. We're in Amish country. If you go east, you're heading back towards the city.
Ah, interesting. Fun. So it's cold there.
It's cold in my basement.
Yeah. I'd be relegated to the basement too, but in Florida we don't have basements, so I'm fortunate that I
True.
get to stay upstairs. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
they'd be full of water if you had them.
yeah. I think I've only actually ever met you on Zoom calls. And I think when I met you was during the pandemic, and it was on sort of an industry figureheads, thinkers kind of thing where we were talking about, safely doing events when nobody allowed any events. And I don't even recall who was on it, but that's where I met you. And you may not remember because I'm pretty forgettable. But um,
Well,
it could have been that. It could have
don't
been
sell
something to
yourself
do
short.
with We Make Events. It could have been, I don't know what it was, but I remember meeting you on Zoom calls and had a few of them and thought, I got to get that guy on the podcast. And here we are, finally.
I do recall Marcel, and it was one of the coolest things about I mean, look, no denying how awful the pandemic was for so many. But one of the interesting things that we discovered during the pandemic is a lot of people want to help, and a lot of people care about the wider industry more so than the gig. And what's funny is, all the gigs taken away and all the other work taken away, while catastrophic for many, there was this culture of helpers that came up and
Hmm.
created new organizations and tried to march new ideas forward and tried to make sure that we would go back after the pandemic was over to a better workplace. Sadly, that didn't happen, but it was cool to see so many people in our industry want to be transform into helpers.
Yeah. No, it's totally true. And I was one of them, and I felt like I was called upon to help because I had a big mouth or something. But we did these weekly Zoom calls. I think you might have been on a couple of those too. That like we did a Wednesday happy hour thing, and it'd be 40 people one week, 100 people the next week, 20 people the next week, and a lot of really cool things and relationships came from that. Like there's I don't know if you know Patrick Whalen or Patrick Dearson, but those two met basically on my Zoom, and they are working together on tons of shows since that time, constantly working together on shows. They hire each other or whatever. And things like that happened on the Zoom call. The we make events things happened on one of our happy hour calls, and just working sort of arm in arm with Strickland on so many things. And I too thought that there were some great things that came out of it all. And it's funny that you mentioned making sure that we'd be better coming out of it, and you kind of chuckled at that. um, where do you think we missed on that, coming out of the pandemic a better industry?
Well, I'm not in the least bit questioning people's desire to make change. That's not the reference to the comment. I think that, um, in my view, when we came back, uh, full of the desire to implement those changes that we spent a lot of time talking about and considering and trying to develop, we also came back after 2 years of dormancy and no income, or different kind of income, and the need to reacquire the things that drive us prior to the pandemic. So the fulfillment that the work gives us prior to the pandemic, and the income that the work gives us. There was this conflicting, competing kind of need or desire. There's the desire to do it differently, and then there's the desire to get the heck back into the world we came from and get working. And those two things are in some ways
In conflict.
directly opposite of each
Yeah.
other. Yeah,
Yeah.
in conflict.
I mean, it's so
So
well said, because I think, like you said, everyone had the very best intentions, and then all
no
of a sudden
question.
it went batshit nuts, and
Yeah,
everyone sort of rallied and did what they did best, and produced the biggest shows the fastest they could, and made money, and did all of those things. And you start to get further and further and further away from that thought that we're going to be angels coming out of all of this, right? And we're going to do things so
yeah.
much better, and I'm going to be healthier, and I'm going to eat better. And I know so many people who have put on more weight since the pandemic than during the pandemic. um, and you know that's just human nature, I guess, a lot of that stuff.
I think, but I do think, or at least again, I'll reference only the things that I'm witnessing. I'm not speaking for the industry by any means, but I do think some of the things have stuck. Um, certainly, the idea that management's certainly the idea that the high level commission jobs are going to care about the teams and go out of their way to make sure the teams are looked after doesn't feel like that stuck so much.
Yeah.
But the teams recognizing, those of us from the trenches recognizing that there's a different way to balance what the work means in your life. Again,
Hmm.
speaking only for myself, like I'd been married for almost 20 years going into the pandemic, and I discovered 6 months in, and so did my wife, oh, you're still here. Like, we had never really been married because I was never home for more than 2 months
Right.
at a time. I was never really a dad because I was never home for 2 months at a time. So the prioritization of the things that matter most to me, and that's not to say that my family didn't matter most prior, but the way that I reflect that to my family changed quite a bit. Like now, I'm booking work related to or balanced with or gauged by my ability to maintain being a good dad and hopefully a good husband. Whereas in the past, I'm taking the work and I'm just going, and then
That's amazing.
I'll keep things up as I go. So I think that some of that, at least for me, has stuck, as has a different kind of humanness. Like, man, we all went through that together, and it didn't matter what rank you were in the workforce. You were
So
suffering,
true.
period, top to
Yep.
bottom.
Yep.
So it was a great kind of, and I'm sure other people have said it, it was a great equalizer in that way. And I think I had an ability to test being a better human at the beginning of last year on a tour that was a short run that I'd been asked to just come in and cover for. And the things that I brought to it, these new discoveries that I brought to that tour about, hey, just be on the floor, be present, connect, push a case, get in the truck, let everybody know you value them first thing in the morning and last thing at night. And it really worked. It brought the tenor of the project to a place that felt good. And I don't think that I would have had that mindset were it not for COVID.
Yeah, I mean, that's all amazing. I mean, the reconnection with the family, and I know so many people who have changed their work habits to better fit their, their home situation, their lifestyle. They learned, hey, I really like being around my family. This is kind of cool, and so they changed a lot of things. That hurt our business a bit because, a lot of people just said, I'm not touring anymore. That's it. I'm done. And so that's been challenging. But at the same time, I think that not everyone came out of COVID happier and
Well, I
kinder.
want to recognize, yeah, I wanted to
Yeah,
recognize that, it's like we're speaking about a perspective that's, mine, and perhaps I share that with some, but for others, it was the exact opposite of that.
yeah.
It really caused catastrophic pain, and, it did not have positives. And I don't want to um, make small of that. That's a big deal that people went through
Oh
that
yeah,
kind of pain, and
yeah.
maybe some didn't come through the other side. And while I can reflect positively on it, I have not lost sight that friends and colleagues cannot,
Oh,
and I
100%.
think that's
Yeah,
important to
100%.
recognize. Yeah.
Well, and I know, you've done a lot about it. People's mental health has become so important to me, and I ask people all the time, are you okay? Can I help you? Do you need someone to talk to? Like, I'll see someone I don't even know making a post on Facebook. There's a particular video guy who has really bothered me a couple of times since COVID. Once where he basically just announced that he was offing himself and on Facebook.
Yeah.
And
Oof.
then all of his friends just started saying, "Does anyone know where he is? Can anyone get to him? Find him." Blah 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 blah. And there was dead silence for, I don't know, 12 hours or something. And I woke up probably at 4 o'clock in the morning and turned on my phone to go see, you know, what was going on. Like, did he survive? And he had put up a post saying, thanks to everyone who tried to reach out to me. I found a way to pull myself out of it, and I'm still
Great.
here. And then just recently, again, he had a series of posts where he said, I'm not worthy, no one loves me, I'm useless to the world, I'm a problem to the world, I'm living in my car in Minnesota, there's a snowstorm, I'm freezing to death, I have to keep my car running because otherwise I'll literally die, I have nowhere to live. And I was like, man, I want to help this guy and I don't even know him. Like, I want to send him money. I'm calling a couple friends in Minnesota saying, hey, I need your couch. I got a guy that needs a place to live until he can get on his feet here. And I literally don't even know him. I couldn't pick him out in a crowd. I have no idea, just what I've seen on Facebook. And then again, the next day he posted something saying somebody reached out, got me a place to live. I'm okay for now. Thank you so much, world. And so like I said, you've done something about this stuff. I haven't. I talk about it. I bring people on to talk with them about it. Uh, I try to help that way, I guess, but I wish I could do more as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm cautious about receiving. Thank you for for sharing that story, and that's awful, and it's a cycle that's hard
Yeah.
to break. And
Yeah, it is.
we all wish that our colleagues, whether we know them or not, find the help that they need, and want to help propel them towards that help when we can. I do, I'm cautious about saying I've done something about that. I think in my experience with the Event Safety Alliance and prior to the Event Safety Alliance, where people foolishly gave me a mic and pushed me up on stage and said, "Talk about our industry." And now, I think what I bring to the table in the helper mindset is a genuine connection that I think I have to the people that work in our business, a desire to have a genuine connection with the people that work in our business, and an ability to speak about those things. And I'm a sponge for understanding who's doing what, where's the help, who are the helpers, and trying to be kind of a spokesperson for all that good work that's going on.
Yeah.
I'm not a clinician, I'm not a safety professional. I'm a production guy, and I love that I'm a production guy. But I recognize and love our industry so much that some of our shortcomings need to be matured through. We need to get better at certain things. And there are wonderful organizations out there doing wonderful things that um, provide greater access to the kind of help that we don't get because of our freelance lifestyle. We don't have a medical plan that allows us to go visit with mental health professionals, and they're the ones to be applauded because they're the ones who are actually doing the hard work. I'm just lucky enough that some people put a mic in front of me and let me talk about it.
Yeah, but I mean, that's, in our industry, it's sort of the little dark secret that's kept out back until people talk about it, like we are right now. And I know you
Right.
get involved with behind the scenes. And as a side note, my podcast, Geezers of Gear, we have our own special coffee blend, which is called Geezers Grind, which is made by a small, very boutique coffee company down here in South Florida called Coffee Cult. And so we direct our listeners. And by the way, I started as a customer first. So I drink their coffee. And I went to the owner, who's a former live events guy, a touring guy. And I went to him and I said, Jamie, you know what? Like, I love your, they've got a really dark roast called Road Dog, and then they have a medium. I said, I love the Road Dog. It's a little tough for me, and my girlfriend just won't drink it. It's too strong for her. So what I've been doing is buying your Road Dog and buying your medium and mixing them, and it's perfect. And he said, well, why don't we just create a custom blend for you? And I said, you would do that? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, here's what I want to do. I want to call it Geezer's Grind, and I want to just give away, whatever profits or anything that's involved in it. And he goes, I'll do you one better. I'll give away all the proceeds from it to You Tell
Wow.
Me the charity. And I poked around a little bit, and I ended up choosing Roby Backstage as the charity. So that's where all of the proceeds from this coffee blend go to Roby Backstage. And so I'm always promoting it on our podcast and stuff. But the reality is, it's actually excellent, excellent coffee. I drink it every single day. You should try it someday. I'll send you a bag if you want. But um,
Yeah.
really, really good coffee. And because Jamie Martis, the owner of the company, is a live events guy, he immediately jumped in and said, "I'll give away all the money to You Tell Me the charity, as long as it's in the industry. I'll give it all away." And so we do. So that money goes to Roby Backstage, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that
Well, I'll
particular charity,
I'll
but
tell you as a I'm not, and I'd love to learn more about it. I'll
yeah.
tell you, as a board member of the Behind the Scenes charity and the president of the Event Safety Alliance, both of which are nonprofits, we should could use some funding.
Yeah,
So the next blend that you create, please choose one of us.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's great that you're doing that, and it's funny that we were talking about the Yetis, right? It's these little niche things that can take hold, and every little penny counts to
Of course.
to a charity of the scale of which Behind the Scenes is and the scale of which the Event Safety Alliance is.
Yeah.
Um, Behind the Scenes is doing great work, and it's empowered by Lori Rubenstein, and they've put tools out for you can get mental health first aid training, which is a program that's been around for a lot longer than people realize. But what Lori and the team did over at Behind the Scenes was craft a version of it that fits our lexicon, that's directed towards our people, and we talk about mental health in ways that apply to the settings that we see typically in life.
Yeah.
And they've had great success and trained several hundreds of people in it. And at the very least, the training helps to break down the stigma of mental health and gives you the tools to spot the potential for someone in crisis and then steer that person towards help.
Yeah, I think
They also have
I spoke with Lori during the pandemic about that, and I said, for a guy like me who just talks to people all day through my business, through these Zoom calls that I do, through my podcast, whatever, I feel like I need to know more. Like, do you have a simple course that I can take so that I can recognize when somebody's, in a spiral or something? And I don't remember why nothing clicked at the time, but it didn't end up happening. But anyways, no, I mean,
but there
honestly,
is, right? That's the
yeah,
mental
yeah,
health
yeah,
first aid training.
yeah, yeah,
And there's, if you go to behindthescenescharity.org, there's a number of resources that they've got there to help people help themselves and to help organizations learn more about the things that are plaguing the industry right
yeah.
now.
Yeah, no, she and everyone at that organization have always done such an excellent job, and really was, as far as I can recall, the first to really get involved in a very industry specific charity for our space. So yeah, I mean, again, thank you for everything you're doing there. I want to get into sort of your transition in life into, almost like a public servant, from a rock and roll foundation like so many people in our industry. But let's get into that a little bit. Like I've read your bio, I've listened to some podcasts, I've done a bit of research on you. I'm kind of a creepy follower here, trying to figure out who you are and stuff. And
You're an informed podcast producer.
I'm an informed podcast guy. I can't call myself a producer because my producer is in the green room right now listening, and she'll get very angry with me. She'll say, "You're no producer. You're just some guy with a microphone." So from what I understand, you came straight out of college and went into trade school, learning electronics.
Almost. So the journey started in fifth grade. I was the master of ceremonies and the technician for the May Day parade, and then I was fortunate enough to be in a school district that had a broad television and theater program. So I got out of regular school through that. But I
Well,
tried college on for my dad, and college and I didn't fit, and then went to electronic school.
interesting. But I mean, that might have been your first sign that we needed some regulations towards safety when they're letting a fifth grader be a technician. you know,
Well,
Perhaps that's a
technician as a fifth
problem.
grader means you're carrying the equipment out and you're plugging it
Okay.
in, right?
Okay.
I
Yeah.
was one of those kids who took stuff apart at home and never put it back together
Me
again.
too. Me too. Yeah. I have some great stories about
Yeah.
that. Like it never worked again once I got into it. Yeah. So
Well, that evolved into me making my own pyro, and that's a different story
I
altogether.
did that as well. Yeah. I did that as well. At my first band, we took these like J boxes, and we used at the time, this is in the 70s or whatever, the click high beam thing out of a car. That was our switch. So that was mounted to a little wooden block on the stage, or like a little sheet of plywood on the stage. And that just was wired into this J box, and that was what ignited the pyro. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? And
We have similar stories.
yeah. And so, the biggest thing was I was the singer, and we just had to make sure that I wasn't standing like straddled over top of one of these boxes when somebody accidentally stepped on the high beam switch, you know? So, yeah. But so in the fifth grade, you're a tech, and then you went to electronics trade school because you hated college to appease your father, right? And what happened from there? How'd you end up deciding instead you were going to be a live events person? I'm sure there's a long
Well,
transition.
it was quick, but there was one job coming out of electronics school that I took that was not industry related, and it was the very beginning. This is '82. It was the very beginning of ATM machines, the money dispensary machines. And there was a bank near my home that was putting its first ATM machines in, and they needed an ATM technician. And I was fresh out of electronics school. So I got to strap on a gun and go in the vault side of the ATM machines and unjam them and get them back to work again, and then move on to the next bank where the next machine was broken down. In those days, they broke down all the time, multiple times a day. So that was my one foray outside of the entertainment business intentionally. But at the same time, near where I lived, a brand new nightclub was being built to do competition with Studio 54 and the Limelight and the like up in New York. And they had an ad in the paper. My mom spotted the ad in the paper and she said, "You should go try for this." And it was a dinner theater that converted after dinner into a nightclub. And in those days, it was in the early days before the nightclub fully opened, it was doing Vegas style review shows. I got in there as a technician and I worked the Vegas style review shows as a technician. But then in the overnight hours, I would work wiring the special effects for the nightclub component, and building the electronics and things like that for the nightclub component. I was technician number 4 on a team, or 10 on a team of quite a few. But I was there. I was in it. I had transitioned the only thing that made me passionate, which I discovered in grade school, into a professional career, a job at 19, right? So that was the bridge. That was the timing of the bridge into professional event entertainment
In,
backstageness.
in
And I never
interesting,
had this desire to be on the stage. Yeah.
right? But so that nightclub thing, did that like make you want to be in the nightclub business forever? Because, I mean, that kind of bug, like we seem to follow some similar paths, but that kind of bug hit me when I think I was working at a music store and I sold a lighting package because that's where you bought it at the time. Because in Western Canada, there were no lighting retailers or anything. So you bought it from a music store typically. And our technicians installed it, and seeing it all come together the way that we had sort of drawn it on a piece of paper, I was hooked. I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. I just want to be in the nightclub business now. And I was a rock and roll guy, but it was a whole different world, and you could sell this permanent installation and see it come together, and they'd use it over and over again. And so did that grab you at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think at 19, you know the thing that's in front of you, right? And at that time, I knew nightclubs as a young person, and it was a safe space. It was a secure job. I fit in. I understood the work. I understood the assignments, and I did the assignments, right? And as my personality came out in that, I ended up getting hired by the design team that helped to design that nightclub while working at the nightclub. And they were building things like Babio's in New York and a bunch of other clubs in New York. And the audio side of that was Richard Long Audio.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and he was building the biggest, most powerful JBL speaker systems known at the time. So I had this crossover understanding and working alongside of Richard Long and his team. And OJ Productions was the other company that was building the nightclubs. And interestingly, a company called International Robotics that built this dancing robot that came out of the spaceship in this nightclub and danced with the patrons of the club for a while.
As you
So
do,
I was
yeah.
kind of immersed in the yeah, right. I was kind of immersed in the nightclub scene in New York City and in outside of Philadelphia where this club was that I worked at. And I was going to the first the nightclub and bar trade shows that were happening in Vegas
Right,
at
I
the
remember
time.
those.
Um,
What was
so
that guy's name
I
that put
was
those
a
on?
young geezer of all those. John Taffer. Oh no! Oh, to put those on. Oh, geez. Oh, I'm not going to remember it. I'm not going to remember it,
Oh,
but I
I
probably saw
remember
a
him
copy of the
so well.
magazine
Really
somewhere.
slick guy with a permanent tan all the time. Like he looked like Trump or something. Like he just always had a
Yeah,
tan,
yeah,
always had a cigar hanging out of his mouth. Oh God, what was his name? I can't
yeah.
remember. I
I
knew him
don't
well.
recall. I
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I
anyways,
don't
those
recall.
were fun
But they were
shows when
fun.
that first
I
started.
can say
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
everyone
yeah.
handing
And
out free
Caesars,
drinks
right?
and pizza and whatever. Like you'd just walk around to the different booths
Free
and
everything.
one would be giving away
Hmm.
cigars, one would be giving away food, one would be giving away margaritas. Yeah. It was just a
Yeah.
party.
So the nightclub was the thing that I understood, and it was the thing that was in front of me at that time. And that evolved to an opportunity at Disney, which evolved to my first. Actually, I went while I was at Disney. I went to film school, which wasn't a 4-year degree film school. It was a an accelerated program being put on by Universal Disney in a partnership with Valencia University. At that time, mid '80s, Florida was going to be the Hollywood East, and they were trying to rapidly build technicians to work in the film business, and bring up the population of those in Florida. And I was lucky enough to get accepted into that 1-year program and went through it. And then before I could land my first work behind the scenes in a film role or television role, I ended up on tour with a corporate show.
Oh, interesting. I want to go back to that nightclub for a minute because I don't remember if I
Sure.
read it or if I heard it on another podcast, but something happened that I think probably started to kind of put the bug in your head about event safety or equipment safety or just safety in general when it comes to producing shows and the equipment we use. There was
Yeah,
an accident that you were involved in.
that's right. That's right. It was the grand opening night, it's a press opening. We were not ready to open. We should not have opened that night, but the wheels were in motion and we were going to open come hell or high water.
Typical of most
And
large nightclubs
during,
today, still, by the way,
yeah,
which
yeah,
nothing changes
and
in some
and rock
sense.
and roll bands too
And
sometimes,
rock and
right?
roll bands,
Uh,
yeah.
we get to the moment of the night, the big reveal of this giant spaceship that tracks out over the house, and it's preceded by shuttlecraft. Remember Star Wars, right? At that time was massive, and these shuttlecraft came out on tracks of their own, independent of the spaceship, and the spaceship then came down through the center of the club and delivered the robot. Well, I was in the booth, at the control booth, DJ booth, looking out over the dance floor at this big crescendo moment. A scream, um, very proximate to where I was, and one of these shuttlecraft had run off the end of the track, came down from 30 feet. It probably weighed something on the order of 800 pounds with all the components with it, and it went through the skull of a woman right at the outside the DJ booth,
Oh my
and
goodness.
killed her. And at the time, I was, as I said, I was a volunteer firefighter as well. So my first reaction was to try to go help. Well, God, that's awful. And the other part of that story is I was operating that fixture when it came off the end of the track.
No. Oh my goodness.
And and you know what occurred was the safety mechanisms to have prevented that thing from coming off the end of the track had not yet been installed. Right, there was meant to be micro switches which turned off the trolley motor that pushed it up and down the I beam, and there was meant to be a welded steel stop at the end of the track. None of that had been installed yet, and instead there was a C clamp just clamped onto the end of the track. Well, this is a factory trolley motor, and when it hit the C clamp, it just pushed the C clamp off, and down came the special effect.
Oh no.
Um, it was awful. I was 19 at the time, and it really resonated. Obviously, for me, it's awful what happened to that girl and her family, and
Certainly not
it
your fault.
laid.
you know.
No, and it went through court, and we all got deposed, and it was determined that it wasn't my fault. But it doesn't. it's like if somebody rents you a car and they don't tell you that the brakes are bad and you plow down a person, still that's you behind the wheel, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it kind of laid in this foundational DNA about, holy crap, I don't ever want to live through something like that again, or be
No
responsible for something
kidding.
like that again.
Did you have to
And of course,
continue operating the lights going forward? Like, did you have to hit
well,
this effect
well,
button
that's just
again?
it. Well, that's part, yeah, absolutely.
Oh
And
my
that's part
God.
of the story, right? After the accident, of course, we began testing all the equipment every night to its limits, and we ran everything up against the stops. And, we went through a very thoughtful, comprehensive safety check every night, which didn't happen on the opening night.
Oof.
Um,
Terrible.
and then, so transition from this, this really awful moment, which doesn't leave your brain,
No.
uh, to going to work at Disney and participating in the Epcot show in lasers and fireworks, where safety is part of the culture every day.
Yeah.
It felt like, oh, okay, this is what it should have been there. And that, was a continuation of the story at the nightclub, and the story that, ultimately becomes some of the energy that brought us the Event Safety Alliance.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I mean, if you were to fast forward to when the Safety Alliance, like, was that part of the foundation that kind of always in the back of your mind or the front of your mind, you were always thinking about safety from that point forward? Or, was it just a coincidence that you ended up in that business, the safety business?
No, Marcel, to say that I've always behaved safely would be a lie, right? And,
Well, I mean,
and
in our
but
industry, it's
but I mean,
impossible.
right? But I will tell you that that night in 1983 never leaves my subconscious. It
Mm.
really doesn't. But there were other, what's the word I want? There were other, impactful moments throughout life. I was standing on stage, as a technician when Guns N' Roses and Metallica did their first show in 1992 in Montreal, and James Hetfield set himself on fire accidentally over the flame mortar and
Yeah.
melted his hand to the neck of the guitar. And then 55,000 people rioted, and there I was, like standing on the stage, looking at all these people rioting, trying to figure out, how am I
Wow.
going to protect myself? How am I going to stay alive here?
Oh
And
my
then
goodness. And you
I
were on
was
stage for
also,
that. That's wild. I mean,
yeah,
what
I
was
was a
that like?
video
That had to be
technician.
full mayhem on stage
It was
when that
absolute
happened.
mayhem.
Yeah.
Absolute mayhem. At one point, I'm like, oh, I know, I'll go hide in the bus. And then I go out to the bus, and I'm in the bus, and I'm thinking to myself, no, they're going to come back here and they're going to overturn the bus and set the bus on fire. Get out, and then
Yeah.
found a stairwell somewhere in the arena, if I remember correctly, in the stadium. But again, so here's this other moment. Here's this other, gosh, what's the word I want? Inflection point where fear of life and life are in the balance, and something well out of my control is happening. And then cut to 1999, where I was fortunate enough to be one of many stage managers. I think there were four of us at Woodstock '99 on the main stage,
Oof.
and 200,000 people are rioting, and because
Mm-hmm.
of their frustration with the event. And again, completely out of my control. I wasn't going to go do anything to prevent it, of course, but I find myself like deeply impacted by witnessing that firsthand and being there. So throughout my professional journey, there are these inflection points that kind of tear open what happened in 1983 and bring that back to the surface and lay in new DNA about safety.
Yeah, I'm a bit
Uh,
curious about these riot situations. Like, you know, and you don't even have to answer this if you don't want, but is your first thought, how do I protect myself? Or is your first thought, how do I stop these people from rioting? Or is your first thought, how can I help to protect the band? I mean, where do you go in that situation?
I think my head runs to all of those things all at once. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, in reflection on 92, in Montreal, I went, when I saw that people were going to charge the stage, without thinking, I grabbed a fire extinguisher. Like I was going to squirt the fire extinguisher at people and keep them off the stage. So I did initially have this I have to protect my land, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, this is bigger than and all these thoughts are happening
I need a
at one
bigger fire
time in this
extinguisher.
crazy, yeah, right, in this crazy kind of dichotomy, and you just you you process what you're processing you do dumb shit when you're feeling
Of
threatened, right?
course. Yeah.
Um, and and so I think I was doing dumb shit, and then I ultimately went and it switched to protect myself. And at that time, I didn't have a family. I didn't, so I was thinking with bravado probably more than I was thinking with brain. Um, but ultimately, it did turn to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Uh, and then there were, when that tour came back a couple weeks later, after James had been, stabilized and there was a path forward, um, we all had this, okay, we know what this movie looks like. And then the very first show back, or with one of the very first shows back, Axel did it again. He showed up late
Yeah.
to the
A
show, and then he
nightmare.
got in a limo and he left. And the promoters called the limo and said, "You turn around, bring him back here. Don't you stop at any stop signs." Tapped on. So this kind of our job has enough adrenaline in
No
it already
kidding.
without having to
Yeah.
contend with riots and
Uh,
so
and what about the
anyway, so
Woodstock one? What did the Woodstock one? Was it a similar situation where it went, from 42 different thoughts to I better find a safe place to survive this?
yeah, I'm not impressed with myself at Woodstock. But what was happening, I think, if I recall correctly, it is the this tension had been building over the entire course of the 4 days or whatever it was,
Yeah.
and whatever the trigger that went from high tension to riot was, it began happening away from the main stage, in the far recesses of the merch trailers and things like that. So, and the delay towers, I think I recall those being tipped over and seeing that firsthand and setting on fire. And I recall at one point going out to the delay towers, a delay tower while it was burning, and then feeling the tension in the audience and like, I'm going backstage again and protect myself.
Yeah.
But I guess for us on the main stage, what was um, less challenging was it felt like the energy of negativity was moving away from the main stage and towards the entryways and towards the back of house, if you will, so that it didn't. I don't recall at any point in time audience members coming towards the main stage and coming up on the main stage, though I've had that happen
Yeah.
when I was with Marilyn Manson. Um, so we didn't feel overly. I don't believe we felt overly threatened at that time because it was clearly moving away from us.
Yeah.
But it was just awful. I mean, the next morning I can remember being on a scooter or a golf cart or something, and I remember running into Lug and some of the team that were out there, and we were looking at these burned up trailers that were still smoldering, and like, how do you make sense of that? It's not what we're built for, and it's not what we're built to see every day, and you're kind of in this fog of a space in the aftermath of that.
Yeah. It's amazing what a crowd can convince itself to do. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
one person gets this ingenious, idiotic idea and then convinces a few people around him. And next thing you know, there's 200,000 people rioting in mud and stuff,
yeah.
right? Like, I mean, that was such a
I
disaster. I remember I had a bunch of
I
lighting out on that and it came back in pretty bad shape. Uh,
oh yeah, I bet.
yeah.
I can remember the next morning the sun coming up. 'Cause I don't think any of us left. The sun came up and there was this fog over the field. And out of the fog, marching in a single line across the field, were all the state police or first responders, kind of poking through the refuse on the field looking for bodies. And we were just aghast, just like, God, please don't let them find a body out there. Please,
Yeah,
please, please, please,
what
please.
a gig that
And
is.
I remember them coming all the way to the stage, doing an about face, and going out again. It was the most surreal thing to see them come out of the fog and then disappear again into the fog. It was just like, God.
Yeah.
And that late, it stays with you. I mean, I haven't thought about that moment for a while, but I have chills right now just
Yeah.
remembering it. It's
No,
just
that's
awful.
incredible stuff. I mean, there's a few others that we can talk about as well, even including one very, very recent one. You know,
Yeah,
whoever saw, you know, paratroopers, you know, climbing into a crowd and killing people. You know, I didn't have that on my list of things that were probably going to happen at an EDM festival. You know, um,
that's really. I mean, it's so hard to even think about, right?
it
It's just
really is.
awful.
It really is. It's disgusting. So you following Disney at some point, you made your way into touring, right?
Yeah, so I went. My roommate got a call, somehow got on this the Bill of Rights tour, which was a 200th anniversary of the Bill of Rights, and it was going to travel to all 50 states and two cities in California and two cities in Texas, and be out for more than a year. And it was an arena-sized thing.
This was
And
a
I
music tour.
remember, no, it was a
Oh, because I was thinking,
traveling,
what a
it was a
weird concept for
traveling
a music
museum.
tour.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a traveling museum. It's really interesting, in my view. But so I remember asking my roommate, like, "That sounds super cool. Do you care if I try to get on it too?" And I applied. I don't recall how I applied. I'm sure he helped me as well. And the I got hired. I got hired as a technician because it had a robotic component to it, and I had robotics in my background through the nightclub, and I had all this mechanical stuff. I was an early automation guy, if you will.
Hmm.
And so we embarked on this thing that was out for, God, it was out forever. And we were in each city for a week. And the premise of the tour was it was 11 tractor trailers of gear going into arenas, um, uh, or convention centers in some instances. And we carried with us one of the original handwritten copies of the Bill of Rights,
Oh my goodness!
200-year
Wow.
old, yeah, in a hermetically sealed viewing pod that then traveled. It traveled on top of a robotic sled. The robotic sled and the document then traveled in the back of an armored vehicle, and the armored vehicle then traveled in the back of a tractor trailer.
Whoa.
So, the construct of the show was as an audience member, and this went out to Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and, school age kids. You come in the arena, you go on the arena floor, and you go through this like Disney pulsed line, and you see videos about how the Bill of Rights impacted the development of our country. And then the final thing you do is you go into a viewing chamber and you see the actual handwritten copy.
Wow.
And then, of course, you dump out into a merch booth, right? Uh, so it took a few days to build, and it was in each city for a week. So, it took a while to get it done.
That's cool. That's interesting. I don't even recall
Yeah,
ever hearing about that. But
I ended up being the technical director for that thing. And there was a lot of cutting edge technology happening on it at that time. And so the production manager, you were asking about the transition, the production manager of that became Morris Lyda, who at the time handled Genesis and Phil
mhm,
Collins, and
yeah,
I think also Pink Floyd and some
yeah, just
others. He
little
was
X.
also John Belushi's right hand guy. Yeah, Little X.
Wow.
He was yeah, and he was also a rodeo star. Um,
Interesting.
and he asked myself and a couple other folks to go from that tour into a Genesis Stadium tour, um, and that was the beginning.
So your first rock and roll tour was Genesis in stadiums, which I actually saw. I
Yes,
saw it in I mean, that would have been what, the early 90s or something?
yeah, we can't dance. I think it was '92.
Yeah, I saw that in, I believe it was in Miami. Uh I,
We actually had Miami and Tampa, and I think Tampa we may have had to cancel because of Phil's voice. Anyway, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that was a cool show. I remember it. That was the one where all the video screens
Yeah,
uh
it was the first ever touring video screen, and it was at that time it was a jumbotron, so it was massively heavy.
yeah.
Um, and it was also, not to make matters even worse. Not only was it the first touring video screen, it was the first touring moving video screen.
Right,
So we were
exactly.
tracking these incredibly heavy screens back and forth across the
Yeah, I
stage.
remember it so
Again,
well. Great show.
all on technology that had never been done before,
Right. Yeah.
um,
Which is so typical in our
which,
industry. That
yeah,
is so
yeah.
crazy
And
that your
had,
very first rock and roll tour was Genesis in stadiums.
and probably the only band I ever really was passionate about as a kid, right?
Wow. So you were pretty damn
So crazy.
excited.
I was pretty damn lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So, I mean, that became what, a 20-year touring career ish?
No, I'm on 35 years of touring, or close to
Oh,
35 years of touring.
yeah. Well, yeah, because you
Right?
still do
Yeah.
selective tours, right? Like you'll still go out and tour.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
Wow.
right.
That's
I think
awesome.
that's what the math is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is really, really cool. So,
Yeah, I've been blessed.
then from again, this is just me following notes that I went out and found. So something I think happened that really started to kind of focus another passion for you and to sort of reshape your future a bit was the accident that happened in Indiana at the Indiana State Fair. Is that correct, or
Yeah, so that, it is
am I
correct.
full of
You
shit
know, I
again,
think
like usual?
no, no, you've done your homework, Marcel.
Oh, good, good.
Um, it is correct. I think the setup to that is prior to Indiana happening. I had already been using my voice on conference stages to just talk about our industry and to try to,
Okay, yep.
remind people of things that, as an industry, we might want to be considering. And folks like Larry Smith were dumb enough to hand me a microphone, and I was dumb enough to take it. Right.
Hmm.
So um, I was talking there. I was talking to Polestar in early days, and at maybe LDI. Anyway, so I was already kind of a voice that that was expected to be heard from at some point. Whether that was good or bad, it remains to be seen. But and
Seems to
then
have worked out okay.
and all, yeah, greatest volunteer job ever.
Yeah,
Uh,
doesn't pay well, but
also at that
damn, am I famous?
also at that time, yeah, all seven of my followers.
Right, right.
Uh, Also at that time, building up to the Indiana story was my wife and I had a very long journey trying to get pregnant and have a child, and and by very long I mean over 6 years. And so 2 years prior to Indiana, we got my wife got pregnant, and my son was born prematurely, significantly prematurely, 2 months early,
Mm.
and it was touch and go. It was near, it was an emergency C-section. There were a lot of things building up to that, but the fact that we had tried for 6 years and failed, and finally got to this place where we were going to succeed, and then there was a near failure again, just kind of kept tearing at this, life is fragile
No
mindset.
kidding.
Um,
Wow.
and
You
then,
that kind of stuff makes you start questioning whatever your belief system is, right? Like, what the
yeah,
hell? It took us 6 years to finally get pregnant, and now you're doing this to us? Yeah, that's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, that's a great encapsulation of the mindset at that time.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and then Indiana happened in August or September of 2011. And again, you asked what was my first reaction. You didn't ask this, but I think to myself, what was my first reaction to Indiana? I was like, holy F, how do we do this? How do we make, wow, could that happen to me? Holy crap, where do I go learn to not let that happen to me? How can I be better prepared to
Yeah.
avoid what awful thing just happened there? And at that time, let's not forget, our industry was still making it up as we go. And to this day, we still do that to some part. And we don't have much regulatory oversight, and we don't have. So when I looked around trying to figure out where I could learn something, there was nothing. The
Hmm.
closest thing I could find was the uh, International Association of Venue Managers ran a class called the Academy for Venue Safety and Security at that time, and I enrolled. I'm like, screw this, I'm going there because it sounds close. And at that academy, here I am in a room full of venue manager type people, some of whom I knew. but no production people in there. And they were talking about things like, weather disruptions and safety of audiences and things that impact me as a production person, but downstream of the duty of care that a venue has. And I thought, God, this is fantastic. It was a week of classes. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. Um, where are all our people? And why don't we have something like this? At the same time, there were a number of folks who were in communication together on the 800 conference line, talking about what had occurred in Indiana and that we can't let that happen again. So, just like COVID, a number of people were motivated by the accident, the tragedy, to try to do something. And I happened to be in that conversation. I unfortunately, the first call that I have the first call that I tried to set up for this group, I missed for reasons, for family reasons, and that was unfortunate. But anyhow, this small group of people started talking about it, and the group kept getting larger and larger and larger over time in the wake of Indiana.
And this group was,
and at the same
people
time,
like you, production managers,
people
whatever.
like me. Yeah, it was Dave Lester, it was Keith. Bowen from, at the time he was with the
Tomcat,
trussing company. It was
or Thomas,
Tomcat at the
Tomcat.
time. That's right. Or Thomas. There was a ton of people on these calls. John Brown and we've got them listed in the event safety guide. This original posse of folks, the cadre of folks that got on it, Charlie Hernandez, and all of us were, just talking about, God, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? At the same time, I was putting myself through this training. And as the conversation progressed, it became clearer and clearer that we have very few guidelines that are directed at us as an industry. Keith Bowen was aware of, and there were others on the call as well who knew about the U.S.'s version of the temporary demountable structure standard, to try to speak to the outdoor stages we erect and put some. But what was happening is these things were happening in such small pockets, and they weren't getting wide attention. And then one day, my son, who took forever to come to us, and I are home alone, and I can't hear him anymore from the office. I don't hear him wrestling. So I'm like, I better go check on him and see what's happening. I can't find him in the house.
Quiet boys are a problem. Quiet girls, no problem. They're reading a book or baking something, doing something smart. Quiet boys are doing something really bad. Yeah.
Funny. Well, you're right. So I find him in the pantry. He had climbed the shelves of the pantry to get to some candy at the top shelf. And of course, I did what every dad would do. I didn't get him down. I took a picture of it. And I said,
That's good.
I said, what are you doing, son? He said, I'm okay, Dad. But what are you doing? He said, I'm okay, Dad. Okay, so I sat there and waited for it. And then eventually he said, Dad, can you get me down? So he got himself up, but he couldn't get himself down. That night, laying in bed, I had this juxtaposition moment. Like, my son had this expectation of safety. He didn't know he was in harm's way. He just had to, he's going to be fine, right?
Yeah.
And he put himself in this place, just like those people in Indiana.
Yeah.
The 7 who died.
Wow.
They went into that venue not believing they were in harm's way. We had the duty to take care of them, and we failed. So it's like our audiences have an expectation of safety, and then it all just started to I couldn't sleep anymore, and all this expectation of safety, and so that became part of the energy that convinced this group we need an organization. We need to speak on behalf of our industry. We need to find ways to create learning material.
But let me back up here a second.
And eventually,
isn't it incredible though? An industry the size of ours, at that point, it wasn't quite as big as it is today, but it was big in 2011. And so an industry the size of ours, how hard, number one, you had to work to find training safety training for a rather large and rather dangerous industry. If you look at the things that we're doing, hanging tens of thousands of pounds over people's heads and flying things out into the audience, blowing shit up on stage, we're a fairly dangerous industry with no real safety protocol. And so, you wanted to be trained, you wanted to learn, you had a passion and a desire to become better, and had no way to do it except this venue management thing. And then secondly, it's such a good point, this expectation of safety. Like when you get on a boat, you expect that someone tested the hull of that boat. It's not going to leak. It's not going to sink. It's not, the engine's going to propel it forward, hopefully, and things are going to work properly, and it's not just going to catch fire or something. When you go to a concert, you expect that all these experts with these backstage pass things hanging around their neck are going to take really good care of you, and everything's been thought of, everything's been tested. There's all kinds of safety protocol and rules and things that they're following. God forbid, like I'm not allowed to speed over, 40 miles an hour on my way to the venue, but I get to the venue and there's no rules for people flying spaceships over my head or whatever, right? So I don't know if I'm making a statement or asking a question, but to me, that has always been a shocking thing about our industry.
It is both a blessing and a curse, I think. I often say if you benchmark the modern day live music touring industry back to the Beatles at Shea Stadium in '65, I think, we have done a lot of cool shit
No
and a
kidding.
lot of dangerous shit
No
between
kidding.
then and now without a whole lot of oversight. Just simply the desire to not F it up and not get some of our colleagues hurt or our artists or our audience members hurt has kept us as safe as we are. And so one could argue, what's the point? We don't need it. We're doing okay. And if you think about the whole planet, you think about the way the sun moves around the planet, the number of shows that are happening on any given day, and the fact that only once in a while do we hear of something catastrophic. It's not like we're overtly screwing it up. We're
It's a
doing
good
okay.
point.
We're doing
It's a
really
good
well.
point. Like
You
you
know,
would think there would be a lot more problems. And by the way, those once in a while events are usually either weather related or some asshole with a gun related or, things like that. It's not typically down to incompetence or just a complete failure by a crew to put a safety on a light fixture or something like that. Like it's usually down to some outside thing.
unforeseen. Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
that's
I
a
think
great
that's
point.
probably true. I mean, I don't have the metric, but I would let's hypothesize for a minute. Like of all 10 things that we hear about that are disasters in 2023, whatever the number is, maybe only two or three are related to incompetence in producing the event, I think is what
Yeah.
you're saying, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So I don't have a scientific background on those numbers, but I think you're right. I think, obviously, Christina Grimmie, Pulse Nightclub, Bataclan, Vegas, Manchester, those examples are the kinds of things you're referring to that, these weren't production related failures. These were
Yeah.
bad people doing bad things
Hmm.
that's hard to predict. And as an industry, who foresaw our industry needing to think about active shooter training and all these other things? That's just ridiculous. Even the Event Safety Alliance, it was born out of the tragedy in Indiana, focused only at that time on weather, structure, and command and control. And since then, we've had to expand the nature of our subject matter expertise and find additional ways to talk about new problems and empower our industry to figure out how to plan for the potential for those
There's a
problems.
guy I had on my podcast a few years ago, and you might even know him. I think a British guy, um, Eric Stewart.
Yeah, of course I know him.
Yeah,
Sure.
so we had him on, and I was blown away because he was all that other stuff. Like he wasn't talking about people hanging lights wrong or
Right.
incompetence of the production itself. He was talking about crowd management, people
Yeah.
using drones to come into concert events and drop things on the crowd. stuff like what happened in Israel. He was talking about those types of things, the Las Vegas. Um, and I found it incredibly interesting and incredibly scary as hell. Like the stuff that this guy was telling me could happen, whether you're
Yeah.
at your kid's graduation or you're at a football game or you're at a concert event, and it makes you want to lock yourself up in your house and never go out, when you listen to him, right? The things that
Yeah,
could
I'm
happen.
super grateful for. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you didn't.
I'm super grateful for Eric Stewart and his wife Dawn and the work that they do. And as you said, he comes from the public safety side and some
Mm-hmm.
very high roles on the public safety side in England, um, and has made it his passion project to propel crowd safety and crowd management ideas to the forefront. And England, thankfully, has well, thankfully for the rapid success of the ESA, England had their transformational moment a decade or more before we
Right.
did,
Yeah.
and we were able to borrow a lot of our work from what they had already done. We used to joke. I can remember going to England, and they had embraced the safety culture uh, while the rest of the industry had not. And I can remember going into places like the O2, going, "Screw you! I'm not wearing a hard hat. I'm not
Hmm.
wearing my hat. You know what? I'm not doing that. I own the building. I'm the production
Yeah.
manager today,
Yeah.
right?" And I that is representative, I think, still to this day, of a lot of the mindset of people who are supposed to be the adults in charge of the concerts and events that go from city to city. And we have a propensity to come in the building saying, "I'm in charge and my rules are at play today." And we do that for a number of things not related to safety, but we also do it related to safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunate that that's our culture. I think one of the hopeful outcomes of the Event Safety Alliance is that we demonstrate that we can change the culture. It's not so much about making codes, and although that's important for us to demonstrate our value, it's really about how do we advance the cultural belief of safety. Like, you get in your car, you put your seatbelt on, you don't even think about it, but you're behaving safely. And you're doing that out of habit because as a child, maybe not for you and I, but as a
Yeah.
child, that was what you were taught from the beginning. You never even thought twice about it. You don't think about, I'm just driving without my seatbelt.
Jim, that is such a
And
great point, and it's sort of old school, new school kind of thing, and it's a very positive thing because I remember, it's not that long ago, and I remember a particular accident, and I'm not going to talk about any of the companies involved. You may or may not know, but I remember a particular accident. I think it might have been in Washington D.C. where uh, gentleman stoned out of his brains climbing truss, no fall arrest system whatsoever, and fell and was killed. And everyone just kind of went, maybe we should use fall arrest and make people wear it every time they're climbing. Maybe we have a drug problem in this space, and
yeah,
in very dangerous jobs, people shouldn't be drunk or stoned doing those jobs. And
yeah,
fast forward to today, I was talking to a friend of mine, a young guy who's a video tech, and he quit a production because they wanted him to do things that he deemed unsafe. And when he explained it to me, I remember judging him. Like, I didn't say it out loud, but my internal mouth was going, don't be such a pussy, but because
yeah,
he was
yeah.
complaining about things that would have been like 10 times worse 20, 30 years ago. But today they've got such better standards with regard to safety, at least safety protocols for these people who are climbing. And am I wrong?
I would say, well, it's not standards that cause uh, a rigor to wear a harness. I mean, we still fight the old school mindset of bravado, and I've always done it like this, and I don't need a
Right.
harness, and I've got it on, but I haven't clipped in. These things are still really prevalent in our
Huh.
industry.
That's
And
terrible.
for the first 10 years of the Event Safety Alliance, we tried to push the Bible top down. Like, let's get all the old dogs in the conversation. Surely they'll respect what we're attempting to do, and they'll help make sure that it's the behavior, the normal behavior. And that didn't that that's kind of like top down economics. It didn't really work out so well. And it's not that the big established names don't respect safety. They absolutely do. They don't want anybody hurt. It's not the priority for them. The projects are massive, and it's not to say that they under prioritize it. It's just not top of mind. So we're transitioning in this year and last, the Event Safety Alliance, to try to really go bottom and middle out. Like, let's get into colleges, let's get into high schools, let's make sure that students at all levels, if they're learning about safety, they've got the event safety guide, which is going through a revision, but it's a good starting place. We had nothing prior to the event
Yeah,
safety guide as
yeah,
an industry,
yeah.
right?
I didn't realize it was
So
still a problem today, though. Like I thought all riggers had to wear, harnesses
it's
and
it's the had to wear thing that's not right, Marcel. I don't think. I think it's obvious for us that riggers should wear harnesses, but there isn't an OSHA inspector standing there saying, or any other kind of inspector for that matter, saying you can't go up until you have your harness on. Thankfully, much of the industry has made that true. But I think where I'm hung up on the thought is that it is a must do. It's still not a must do.
so does it need to be like, or is this sort of a carrot stick situation? Like, do we need hardcore rules and regulations and fines and things like that, or
No,
no?
no. Well, I think we need mechanisms to help speed along the transition, which is still moving at a snail's pace. But I would be cautious about overregulation and overfining, because then that may stifle creativity to some extent. We and that's probably going to get some blowback from me saying that, but I think it's important for us to design for safety, period. It's important for us to behave safely in everything we attempt to produce, not just for ourselves, but for our band, our crew, and our audiences, period. They must be first priority. One of the things the ESA did in its very early days after we had a draft copy of the guide was we went to Indiana to meet with Governor Mitch Daniels and his team, in the wake of the Indiana State Fair, because they were getting ready to enact some state regulation around live shows in Indiana. And they would have been crippling. The example that I use is the closest audience member would not have been allowed closer than the falling radius of the stage. So
Ugh,
that meant that the closest audience member would have been roughly in front of house,
20th
right?
row or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were lucky enough to get an invitation. We were lucky enough to have some smart people with us who could actually speak at that level, because that's certainly not this old roadie. And state the case that, look, maybe it's best that the industry try to solve these safety concerns on behalf of the government, because we know best how to produce the event, and that may not be your specialty. So um, we left this hour plus long meeting with the governor and his people, and we got a handshake agreement that we would be able to go forward with our work and return some results to him, and try to speak on behalf of the industry about how we become safer.
Hmm.
And we did that. And we produced this first version of the safety guide. And as you know, now we're also producing American National Standards, which elevates guidance to standard and makes it more of a should do.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the challenge there for sure is if you put it in the hands of governors, or of any kind of legislator or whatever, we're going to end up with really shows that have lost a lot of excitement, or they've become worse by these regulations, because these people don't understand how to put on shows, and they don't understand necessarily what the problem is. They just want to put a fire extinguisher on every problem, right? Like, including crowd management.
Yeah, yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think our business is to, for instance, in crowds, to study crowd behavior and figure out mechanisms to improve crowd behavior and manage crowd behavior. Our business is to put up shows and figure out mechanisms to make sure that they don't fall down. Our business is to manage people and to make sure that they can do their job safely and healthful and with health. That's our business. It's not the government's business. So, and I think that we're not the only example of places where it's better if the industry try to come to consensus and create its own safety mechanisms versus trying to shoehorn something else into our industry,
Right.
and follow those rules. The example there is, while OSHA 10 and OSHA 30 are important trainings to have, they don't really speak to our lexicon. They don't speak to the kind of work that we do in general. But the hazards are the same. Working at height, working around electricity. These hazards we share with OSHA, but you try to take someone whose only journey has been in the backstage space, they may have difficulty understanding the language of OSHA that makes it unrelatable.
Right.
So, one of the things the Event Safety Alliance is working on is, as has the IATSE, is an entertainment specific OSHA training, where we use references that apply to
That's
our workspace.
Yeah. Well, I mean, another example would be the FDA controlling entertainment lasers,
Yeah,
regulating
I mean, there are
entertainment lasers.
dozens of those, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
that to me has
yeah,
always just been a head scratcher because we
yeah,
can put
yeah.
10,000-watt moving lights, which I don't know of one, but we could put a 10,000 moving watt moving light with a beam this tight and blast it right into somebody's eyes and burn holes in their retinas. That's okay. But a 10-watt laser on a Pink Floyd tribute
Yeah.
band or whatever, you got to carry along, specialists for that. It's just stupid. So
I've
yeah.
I've had an LD or two set backdrops on fire with those beams you described. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm with
Well,
you.
when the Claypacky Sharpie first came out, I remember somebody showing me at one of the trade shows an Italian guy going, "Look, I can light my cigarette with the beam." And I'm going, "Damn, that
Yeah.
could be
Yep.
problematic."
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah, it's pretty wild. Let me ask you this question. Well, first, I got two big ones I want to ask you because I know I can't keep you all day and these are going to take a minute. First, what do you need to, besides money, let's say, because obviously any not for profit is always raising money, and certainly if I or any of the things that I do, if I can help with that in some way, just pull me in and I'll try and help. But aside from money, like what are the things that you need to continue moving this ahead, moving it forward, and making not only crews safer but audiences safer?
I'm grateful for the question. And I'm going to diverge for 1 second, but then land the plane. We knew in the onset of the Event Safety Alliance that our tone and tenor, in the way we addressed our industry's errors, needed to be carrot, not stick. Like if we came out of the gate as an organization and said, "You can't do it like that," we would never have had any audience. And we have always recognized, and still to this day recognize, that Indiana could happen to me. It could have happened to
Yeah.
anybody else out there. The state of the industry at the time, the state of information flow, the state of being able to talk, as band to authority having jurisdiction, and have similar ideas about safety. It just didn't exist in a way that it does today. And so I think part of it is because we're not shaking a stick for fear of losing audience, maybe we're not getting as much traction as we could. So what do we need as an organization? Well, at the operational level, we need marketing help. We need to be able to get the word into places where it's not currently. We still go sit in rooms for our safety roundtable and things of that nature where people have never heard of us before. And that's because we don't have a marketing budget and we don't have the ability to be as we're the least sexy subject in all of the
Of
entertainment
course.
business, right? So
Yeah.
who gives a
Yeah.
shit about us?
Yeah.
But we're doing all the hard work, right? So a lot of our support comes from the insurance sector, obviously, because we're doing the hard work for them and we're keeping their claims down. But we're also trying to prove a negative. So, how does someone quantify the work of the ESA has had great impact on reducing harm at live events? How do you quantify that? Because, if you're doing the job well, nothing's happened. Well, go measure nothing.
True. Yeah.
And it's a real challenge for us. What are some of what we see as recognition of our work is we go to events, we see our weather decision matrix, which we created in 2012 on the stage. We see it in the production office. We see there's no question that that's the matrix that we designed and helped propel out into the industry. We see language referencing the Event Safety Alliance in riders, which is part of how we know that we're making an impact. Um, we would love to have an event safety kind of like UL listing so that you knew you were with a competent vendor and that we could set a bar of what competency
Yeah.
looks like.
ESA approved or
This is
whatever.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We've had that in the back of our head since the beginning, but it's a big lift, and who wants the responsibility of being the accrediting body, right?
Hmm.
Uh, we're we're there's it's an all volunteer organization, and people contribute when and what they can. But what's unquestionable about everybody who's contributing is everybody's passionate
Yeah.
about the industry. We also need people who can write. We're rewriting the safety guide to improve it for the next generation. We're writing American national standards that need people on those committees to help make sure that the work we're doing is actually representative of the broad definition of live events, which, well, let's not forget, it's not just music touring. Um, and it's hard to get people to participate, especially as volunteers, in the organization. It's a very shallow pool that we have to pull from.
Yeah. One thing I would like to do is, and I've got Sarah here so she can get it all put together, is we'd like to become, we'd like you to be a sponsor for no money of our podcast. So in other words, we'll read promos on the Event Safety Allowance. Yeah, give me money. We'll read promos for various podcasts. We'll talk about the alliance. We'll talk about some of your, basically your team can just refresh content for us every month or two, and we'll read
Super
different
generous.
things and stuff. And if there's anything to say, we'll have anyone from your team on at any time and talk about it and promote it. Because, like you said, if you have no marketing budget, it is, it's not a topic that people want to hear about or talk about so much
That's
until,
right.
like, your best advertising, unfortunately, is a disaster,
Yeah,
you know? And
yeah.
one thing I did want to mention, so we keep talking about Indiana. When Indiana happened, can you just explain for a second what we're talking about in Indiana?
Yeah, I'm glad you did that. As I said, this could have happened to any one of us. But the premise is at the Indiana State Fair, there was a very popular country act about to take the stage. And interestingly, simultaneously, about 30 miles up the road, or 30 minutes, I get the details confused. There was a symphony taking place, and they saw this incoming weather front and evacuated the symphony, and everybody got into the safe shelter, and nobody got hurt, and maybe some components of the symphony might have been damaged. Well, at the Indiana State Fair, a DJ took the stage and pointed to the clouds that were coming towards the stage and said, "Well, we're hoping for the best. And as you can see, there's a weather front back there, but we think we're going to be okay. So stand by, and in just a few minutes, band's going to take the stage." And he walked off the stage, and just a few minutes went by, and the gust front, something that we, unless you've been to our weather training, by the way, we do weather training as well, you might not know what a gust front is, or the fact that they typically don't show up on radar, but they're very
Yeah.
deadly, and they're a huge amount, to super high winds. So the gust front blew through while state fair artist, promoter, venue were all trying to make a decision, and who do they communicate the decision to? So they didn't get the decision in time. The gust front blew through, blew the stage over. The stage fell and killed 7 people. One of whom was a follow spot operator up in the truck, up in the
Oof.
storm. Um, and when we teach that moment, or when I'm talking about that moment and trying to teach it, I'm often asked, what caused people to die? Or I ask the question to the audience, what caused people to die at the Indiana State Fair? And very often the response is, well, the stage structure wasn't safe or weather, right? And while those things are true, in my view, my personal view, what caused people to die in Indiana was the lack of an actionable plan. And there's a positive to that. The fact that it was the plan that could have saved lives means we can do something about it. Because if it was solely the weather or solely the structure, it's harder to do something about
So
that.
what would you do
In what way?
in
How do we
retrospect?
solve it?
In retrospect, what would
Well,
you have done in
yeah.
that situation?
So what we teach, what the Event Safety Alliance teach, or what the output of our work has yielded for folks to teach or learn on their own is, as the person with the duty of care for an artist, I need to have a weather plan or an adverse event plan, an adverse crisis plan. And I need to have communicated that through my team, and my team needs to know what to do when we shoot the gun and say it's time to go. So there's my duty to there's the adult in charge's duty to have a plan for the things that that person's responsible for. It's the duty of the venue, and therefore in some instances the promoter, to have a plan for the audience and the things that the venue is responsible for, their duty of care. And it's the duty of the authorities, police, fire, medical, to also have a plan for what to do with all those souls on site.
Right.
Those plans need to be communicated to each other so that, and there needs to be an overriding whose plan do we follow, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You want your
I'm going to
teams rowing the
follow
same
mine.
direction. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And in the event of me being in a host state, a host position, a host venue, and they don't have a plan, I would argue that mine's going to take the place of nothing. It's going to be better than nothing, and we're going to follow mine. Where the venue has a plan, we're going to follow the venue's plan. Or when the staging company, for instance, has a threshold for weather that they're worried about, we're going to follow the staging companies. So, what happens now more often than not as a result of Indiana and the result of our work, and the continuing propellants of our work is conveyance of our work, is more people now understand that they should be considering an action plan in the event of bad things happening and know what to do when those bad things happen. Does that exist at every production manager or tour manager? No. Does every production manager or tour manager, where it exists, communicate those things down through the team and practice them down through the team? No. Our workforce isn't set up like that. But we have the foundational building blocks to be better. And we just need to continue to remind everybody that, gosh, making shows is fun, but going home after you're done is even
Yeah,
funner.
of course. So,
And it
so
needs to be a priority.
very specifically though, to that event, like, would you have gotten on a microphone and said everyone needs to, back away from the stage, or like what types of things might have been done? Uh,
Well, okay.
so
Sorry,
if
I
it were to
maybe
happen
misunderstood
today,
the
what
question
would
the
you
first
do?
time. Yeah. Well, so if it happens today, in all circumstances being what they should be in our regard, the Event Safety Alliance's regard, there is a weather action plan that has specific, non-ambiguous trigger points in it that says when lightning is occurring within 6, 8, depends on the speed of the storm, miles of the venue, you will evacuate the audience to safe shelter. When there is a threat of a significant storm of these characteristics that is within 12 miles of the venue, you will evacuate people to safe shelter. So in today's world, that circumstance occurring again, there is a plan that all of the stakeholders have agreed to. The trigger gets met, storm is 12 miles away or lightning is 6, whatever the triggers are, and then the subsequent action to that trigger takes place. And someone stands on a stage and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we have a storm in our proximity at the moment that is threatening to come over the site. We need you to leave the site right now and go to safe shelter." Those steps occur, and it's said without ambiguity, and it's said without, well, maybe the storm, maybe, you know, that's how we would react to it today.
And would 7 people be alive?
I'd like to think yes.
Yeah. So were there also changes to the outdoor staging manufacturers? Were there additional uh, rules or whatever you want to call it? Was the bar set a bit higher as far as wind loads and those types of things?
The temporary demountable structure standard that that existed prior to that day has been um, rewritten. Not that it was bad work to begin with, but it was rewritten to include additional, and I'm not going to be able to quote them, additional considerations for building an outdoor structure. The attention to making sure your outdoor, sorry, for competent providers, the attention to the detail for making sure your outdoor structure is as per the specifications, built correctly and monitored correctly, is greater now by those high-end providers than it's ever been, I'd like to think. And it's probably always been high. But now we're really meticulous, I think, in those providers to make sure, to double check. The standard that exists to ensure that the stage structure is able to withstand X amount of wind, what the protocol is if that wind is coming, and when to evacuate, when to leave the stage. That is more prevalent and more prevalently communicated than it's ever been. We all know that a falling stage has zero value. It's an insurance claim if nobody gets hurt. So who cares? Don't stand around with a fire extinguisher like I did trying to protect the stage. If the winds are going to exceed X miles an hour, go to safe shelter, let the freaking thing fall, right? Same thing with the
Yeah.
PA, same thing with the LED. That's hard to do. It's a hard decision to make. It's hard to see your equipment get damaged, but at the same time, you made the right defensible decision to get yourself and the other humans around that thing into a safe place. And the rest of it is an insurance claim.
Yeah.
That I think we're doing better than ever before.
Do you think, and this is just an observation, I know nothing, but are LED screens sort of the culprit? Because I know, like, at least early on, they weren't taking wind loads into consideration, or the fact that they were more of a like we went from mesh sides and backs on these stages to solid LED screens, and that creates sort of a wind sail, right?
I'm not an engineer, but I know one or two, and I know um, that nowadays we're referring to engineering um, calculations by any competent provider is referring to engineering calculations on everything that they're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know that going from a 70% scrim on the back of a stage to a blow through LED, while some of which now have 50% transparency in them
Yeah.
from a wind standpoint, is the thing that makes the difference. Same with PA. When a suspended load starts swinging, it's transferring dynamic load into the truss. Is the truss now swinging because it's got slack in its guy wires? Who knows? And in every instance, it's different. Those things I will say are calculable. They're monitorable, and there's an ability to write a plan around what to do with them. Um, and to be more informed about what our safety policy should be because those things are in the air.
Yeah.
There's no, everybody looks for what's the answer. Do I lower the PA or do I raise the PA? Do I lower the screen? Do I raise? There is no one answer. It
Yeah.
depends. It
Yeah.
depends on the structure. It depends on what your goal is. I can tell you one thing for sure: get out of the way in case it falls. Right?
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
be there.
That's probably the
It's
best
just a
idea.
piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my very last question I'm going to ask you is another big one. Uh, what keeps you awake at night? Like there's so many components to what you're talking about with this safety stuff. There's equipment safety, um, terrorism attacks, which have again become much more sort of frontal lobe at this point with what just happened in Israel. And then The other thing that I think plays a role in all of this is the size of the shows now. Like it's very common that there are stadium shows with, instead of 15,000 people, it's 70,000 people. The rigs are massive. There's just more and more and more stuff being hung and flown and zipping across above the audience's heads, and drone shows at concerts, and like there's just so many more components than there used to be, where it was just an arena floor with a stage at one end with some PA and some lights hanging, and that was about it. Now we've got so many other components to it. But what is it that probably, like from a safety standpoint, if you're responsible for audiences and performers and crews safety, what keeps you awake at night? Told you it was a big one.
The short answer to what keeps me awake at night is the possibility that my children will go to a show of any kind and be in harm's way and not come home.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that scale is an issue in this instance. I think those who build large scale shows are more inclined to use the right mechanisms and use the right engineering and to double, triple, quadruple check the work that they're doing to ensure that nothing goes wrong. The bigger the boom, the greater the checking. So I don't think scale represents an industry-wide
Interesting.
issue.
Hmm.
I think underinformed leadership is the gap. And that's not to say that leadership is intentionally being risky. It's to say that the juxtaposition of trying to get the gig, getting the gig, make happen regardless of scale, and add to that the element of I've got to make sure everybody's safe. I've got to make sure the show's safe. I've got to make sure all these other things are safe. Those two things, while not directly in conflict with each other, they're in conflict with each other. Young production people specifically are coming in, trying to cut their teeth, trying to keep the job, trying to succeed, trying to keep the team going. And the priority of all of those things to safety is significantly higher in some instances, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think the problem is scale. I don't think the problem is necessarily manufacture unless you're taking things out of territories we know that don't have a good safety record to build your stage. I think the problem is we we are not yet asking our leaders to be informed about safety, to be educated about safety. We're not requiring these things. You could be an adult in charge of a tour or an event and set off $1 million worth of pyro and not even know what a fuse is, and or not even know what the safety requirements are around the pyro. And I think that's the leader's job. I think it's the adult in charge's job to understand what's at risk. By the way, you carry the legal duty of care to ensure that everything is safe. I didn't learn that until after Indiana. I didn't know. I was just breezing along as a production manager, not a care in the world until Indiana, when it turns out I have the legal duty of care to ensure that nothing goes wrong, which means
Wow.
if shit goes wrong, I'm going to be sitting in front of a judge trying to answer why I didn't enact safety policy.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I think the gap is leadership. I don't think the gap is the
Interesting.
scale.
But how, like, and I'm sure you ask this to yourself every morning, how does that shift happen aside from just checking every disaster box that one could think of? So, wind at a state fair, box checked. We're not going to make that exact same mistake again. Um, you know, God, I hate to say it even, paratroopers flying into an EDM festival. Next time we see parachutes coming into an EDM festival, we're going to question that might be a problem. And what you do. I don't know if there's rules being created in the
Well,
background by guys like Eric Stewart who are saying, we shoot them down or something. Like, I don't have any idea,
yeah,
but
I think the challenge for production people is how much of that lies in the hands of the production person, and
that's
how
true,
much
huh?
of that
Yeah,
should be
that's true.
handled by a guy like Eric Stewart, right?
Yeah. No, that's
So
very true.
I would argue that there's a great place to start learning about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's the event safety guide, and that reasonable adults in charge, production managers, tour managers, whatever the role title is, project manager, reasonable adults in charge should see the necessity to be informed about safety at the very least, to be able to spot risk at the very least, and then know what to do with that risk. We do things that are risky, and that's okay. It's okay to have risk, providing you have the mechanisms to not let that risk become a catastrophic event. It's okay to have fireworks. In other words, it's not okay to let that fireworks land on fire in front of an audience member, right? Um, so I think while daunting, and I was, our first keynote speaker at the first event safety conference was John Barelick, the part for the station nightclub fire, where 100 people died in the
Yeah.
doorway of
That
that
was
nightclub
tough.
fire
Yeah.
when somebody irresponsibly set off fireworks there. Um, and he, by the time he was done, a couple hours into it, you were like, I don't want to work in this business anymore, because he was able to connect the dots to responsibility to places you never would have thought there were responsibility. So if nothing else motivates you as an adult in charge, but to cover your own ass, then let that be your motivation
Good
and
point.
learn about the things that you have responsibility for. You don't need to know how to take the paratroopers out of the sky. You don't need to know how to avert a bombing. You don't need to know about hostile vehicle mitigation measures around an outdoor show. You need to know how to produce your show safely, and you need to know how to spot that you have the Eric Stewarts of the world on your side looking at all the things that are a different duty of care.
Well, yeah, and again, there should be a sort of concerted plan where, like you said before, like everyone's got a plan. Let's get together and figure out whose plan sort of takes top priority on this, and how they all relate to each other, et cetera. But I think just getting it top of mind, it being safety and your responsibility to keep audience members safe and all of that kind of stuff, getting that top of mind, and not just, oh, we've been doing this years, we've never killed anyone.
That's right.
I mean, that's just silly. Thank God airlines don't just say, well, we have way less accidents than cars, so we don't have to fix anything, but they're much louder,
Well,
more catastrophic accidents typically than car accidents.
yeah, but all of our work at the Event Safety Alliance has been derived by other examples. We're not making it up out of thin air.
Yeah.
We've got corollaries to construction. We've got corollaries to airlines, to medical, you name it, because we we just don't want to repeat the same accidents, right? And we want to inform our constituents. We've written now released now 6 American national standards. If you need a place to start, go to the eventsafetyalliance.org website and look under guidance, and you'll see that we've got one on rigging, one on structures that we talked about, right? One on fire requirements, one on event safety, event security, weather preparedness, crowd management. It's right there.
Yeah.
Are these standards necessarily going to change the world? No, but if you read them and you understand them, they will help you avert problems. And without them, we can't expect to elevate those who work in our business. So we've got reference material now that has stood the test of a decade, and peer review, and it is a starting point. We're
Yeah.
nowhere near the finish point.
Jim.
And things like I can't even speak about what happened in Israel, but things
Ugh,
like that, like those are what we refer to as black swan events, like Vegas and Manchester,
yeah.
but they're occurring with greater frequency, which makes them scary, and it makes us overwhelmed as production people. How do I protect against those things? It's really not our job to worry about those things, and that's not to be dismissive of them, but it's like do your job, right? Like, so the Israeli Defense Force, that's their job to prevent that sort of thing from
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
Yours is to make sure that if that trigger moment occurs, your team knows what to do and
Yeah.
where to
Keep
go
your
and where
team
to be
safe.
safe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and unfortunately, they're going to keep happening, these types of events. And
Yeah, for
unfortunately, we're a
sure.
big target because when you're looking to cause maximum emotional impact and fear, you go to the biggest crowds of people having the most fun because you want to change our
Yeah.
lifestyle, right? Like that's the whole thing is you can't be happy. And so,
Yeah.
anyways,
You're
Jim,
absolutely
thank
right.
thank you so much for jumping on and doing this. I've learned a bunch. Um, Whoever on your team would be the right person to communicate with us as far as marketing materials or whatever, if they can just get in touch with Sarah, or Sarah will try and get in touch with them. You should have her
I'll
email
pass the
address.
word.
It's producer@geezersofgears.com. And again, thank you so much for doing it. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Marcel, I appreciate you taking the time with me. That's great. I'm so grateful.
All right, great. Have a good one. See ya.